Good morning. You're watching All You Need to Know on BloombergQuint Live, and I'm Alex Matthew. Thanks for joining us on the last day of 2019. In fact, the last day of the decade. First, the headlines. Reliance Jio adds the most number of active subscribers since inception. India's youngest telecom operator adds 1.44 crore subscribers during the month of October, as per BloombergQuint calculations. The Hinduja group is preparing a bid for the grounded Jet Airways. It is likely to submit a bid ahead of the January 15th deadline. That is a Bloomberg exclusive. Financial creditors to Dewan Housing Finance submit bids or claims worth 87,000 crore rupees. The RBI-appointed administrator has admitted claims worth 81,000 crore rupees so far. And RBL Bank will raise 675 crore rupees through a preferential allotment of shares. The shares will be allotted to 4 investors. And finally, the deadline for the mandatory linking of the permanent account number or PAN with Aadhaar has been extended once again, this time to March 2020, according to the Central Board of Direct Taxes. All right, let's talk about the U.S. markets now. The penultimate day of trade for the U.S. markets in 2019 ended on a weak note. The S&P 500 fell to a 3-week low, while the dollar fell to a 6-month low against major competitors. All of this, however, happened on very thin volumes ahead of the New Year holiday. Renita Young of Bloomberg News wraps up Monday's trading action in this report.
U.S. stocks ended Monday's session lower, and the S&P 500 dropped to a more than 3-week low, all happening as investors weigh more trade headlines and in very thin volume ahead of the end of the year. Now, during the session, we saw quite a few movers. Axum Therapeutics rising after a drug for its acute migraine treatment met end goals and end points rather. And another company that saw clinical trial success was clinical stage dermatology company Sol-Gel Technologies, which rose to a record after its treatment for acne met goals as well, but for a phase 3 study. Now, during the session, we also saw the U.S. dollar sinking to a 6-month low versus its major currency competitors. Also, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index was lower as well versus most of its G10 peers. And this is all as mixed U.S. economic data came through. We saw November goods trade deficit decreasing, and we also saw November pending home sales rising, but by less than originally expected. And it was no surprise that gold rose a little bit during the session, since the U.S. dollar in which gold is priced was lower. And that's a look at your Wall Street action on Monday. In New York, I'm Renita Young for Bloomberg News.
All right, let's turn to the Asia-Pacific region now and take a look at the markets that are open. Sophie Kamruddin is joining me live from the Bloomberg studios in Hong Kong. Morning, Sophie. A couple of markets shut for the day, but for the rest of them, how are they looking and how are they likely to end the year?
Well, Alex, most markets in Asia are closed on the final trading day of 2019. You have Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Thailand offline. Aussie shares trading. We are seeing the ASX 200 off by 1.5%, trading at a session low, but gold miners gaining ground given the strength that we've seen in bullion over the course of the year. Now we are seeing stocks under pressure as well in Hong Kong, off 0.1%, although we do have some data to digest. That was trade showing a brightening outlook perhaps as exports and imports shrank less than anticipated. Now over on the mainland, we are seeing the CSI 300 gain about 0.1%. This is, we also got Chinese PMI data out this morning showing stabilization for the economy, with that reading for manufacturing PMI holding at 50.2. We also had Korean inflation data out this morning, rising slightly more than forecasted, up 0.7% on a yearly basis. But overall, South Korean consumer prices are the weakest on record for 2019, a headache then for the Bank of Korea. And as Renita noted earlier, the dollar has certainly been under pressure towards the end of the year, extending losses as we're seeing funds trim their long positions on the greenback. Back to you.
Thanks so much for that, Sophie. Wish you a happy end to the year. All right, let's turn to some of the big news that came up overnight from the U.S. U.S. trade advisor Peter Navarro has told Fox News that a preliminary trade deal with China is a done deal. Newspaper reports in China also suggest that Liu He is set to lead a delegation to Washington this Saturday. Selena Wang of Bloomberg News has more details on the status of these negotiations.
Given that Navarro is such a China hawk, what this signifies at the very least is that Trump isn't receiving pressure internally to negotiate for better terms for the United States. However, Navarro did not confirm the South China Morning Post that a China delegation will be traveling to Washington over the weekend to sign that accord. Now, as a reminder, what was announced on December 13th was that the United States was going to not slap those December tariffs on, was going to roll back some of those existing levies, and that China was going to be purchasing more farm products. So there has been some skepticism as to whether China can reach some of those ambitious targets that were set, as well as China would agree on some currency commitments as well as intellectual property commitments. Now, the precise terms of the agreement have not been announced yet. We did hear Robert Lighthizer say that he was expecting the agreement to be signed in early January. China has not confirmed any of these dates that have been thrown around over the weekend. However, we did hear the Chinese ambassador say that it's no problem for China to live up to its phase one agreement, but the U.S. also needs to live up to its vows when it comes to issues like Taiwan. So that is a reminder that even though we are seeing U.S.-China trade tensions de-escalate, bilateral tensions still remain around issues of Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and Taiwan.
At least that de-escalation and the temporary trade truce, are we expecting that to be reflected in China's PMI numbers for the month of December out tonight?
When it comes to the PMI numbers, we are expecting that to be reflected, although it is expected to retreat from that big jump that we saw in November, but it is expected to reflect the anticipation and improving sentiment around the imminent signing of this phase one trade deal. Something to watch out for as well is the private investment part. Private investment has remained very sluggish due to weak sentiment, and that is expected to be pretty challenging to turn around. I do also want to point out that I am looking ahead to Xi Jinping's annual New Year's Eve speech that's going to be tonight. Last year, Xi Jinping really stressed self-reliance, and he said the unforeseen changes in 100 years. During the 70th anniversary speech just a few months ago, Xi Jinping also emphasized that China needs to remain strong and that no force can stop China's rise. So during the speech tonight, it'll be interesting to see what Xi signifies in terms of China's plans for the new year, what policy plans he chooses to highlight from the year past, as well as any hints to the sign of the relationship and ongoing trade negotiations with the United States. So we are expecting some of those similar themes to be highlighted.
All right, yesterday we spoke to you about the various global markets and their performance this year. Today, we're bringing you commodities, which are set to post their best year since 2016. The Bloomberg Commodities Index, too, has gained as a risk-on mode sweeps the market and the dollar eases. Crystal Shia of Bloomberg News takes you through the year gone by and the outlook for 2020.
So we have seen the Bloomberg Commodities Spot Index rally to the highest in more than a year recently, and there are a couple of drivers behind this. Number one, we have seen the prospect of a US-China trade deal, which means that trade tensions have eased slightly. And number two, the odds of a US recession has dropped. And thirdly, conditions in China, one of the biggest buyers of commodities, conditions have improved. We have early indicators compiled by Bloomberg showing the activity in December have picked up for the first time in 8 months.
What about the currency? Because we're now seeing weakness in the dollar. This GTV chart on the Bloomberg showing that the Bloomberg Dollar Index is on track for a very sharp drop in the month of December. So how would a weak dollar affect conditions for commodities going into 2020?
We're going into 2020, yes, the dollar is a factor, but of course there are other reasons as well. And it really zooms down to the individual commodities. So if we look at precious metals, for example, that's a very interesting sector. We have seen palladium rally over 50% this year, and come next year with shortages expected to persist, it is expected to go higher. And if we look at other commodities, for example, iron ore, that's also going to be a very interesting year. It has been a very, very wild ride for iron ore this year on the back back of supply disruptions. So next year, with supply expected to come back and a slowdown in China expected to impact steel demand, we are also looking at a drop in iron ore prices.
What are we seeing in the oil market? Because, of course, it's always about the oversupply and the glut story, not to mention the weak demand that we've seen so far. That has been the story in 2019. What will be the story in 2020?
Well, 2020, I mean, for oil, it's also going to be about, like you said, oversupply. But I think one of the other big themes to watch in commodities and the oil market will be IMO 2020, which is, this regulation that ships have to either use scrubbers or switch to compliant fuel. And we have already seen the impact of that in the freight market. And we have heard from shippers that, the prices are going to roll over, for example, in iron ore to the steel mills. So we have to keep a lookout for IMO 2020 as well, which starts January 1st.
All right, let's see what else is making headlines across the globe. Viviana Hurtado of Bloomberg News brings you the first word headlines.
Sources tell Bloomberg earlier this week former Nissan boss Carlos Ghosn arrived in Lebanon from Japan. That's where he'd been under house arrest since April. One person familiar with the matter says Ghosn had, quote, fled Japan. Ghosn holds both Lebanese and French citizenship. In November of 2018, he was arrested on charges of financial misconduct. He denies any wrongdoing and says he's a victim of a conspiracy. Uber and the U.S. courier company Postmates are suing the state of California. They allege a labor rights law is unconstitutional. This week is set to go into effect. The lawsuit is a preemptive strike against the state's landmark measure. It's designed to ensure gig workers receive employment protections. Uber and Postmates argue the process unfairly targets gig economy companies and the law threatens workers' flexibility. Quote, positive and offensive measures to bolster the country's security. This from Kim Jong-un ahead of his annual New Year's Day speech to the nation. Kim has vowed to take a new path in nuclear talks if the U.S. doesn't offer further concessions by year's end. The Trump administration says it's watching for more provocations. And the U.K. is likely to drop its opposition to extend the Brexit transition past 2020. That's according to EU Trade Commissioner Phil Hogan. He told the Irish Times Prime Minister Boris Johnson is unlikely to honor his claim he'd, quote, rather die in a ditch than extend the Brexit timeline. Legislation to deliver Britain's departure on January the 31st will be debated again in the new year. Global news 24 hours a day on air now. Quick take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Viviana Hurtado. This is Bloomberg.
All right, let's turn to the Indian market now, and Agam Vakil is joining me to tell you all about the trade setup for the day and also to tell you what's happening in the futures and options space. Momentous day, Agam. It's the end of a decade. How are we looking to end the decade here in India?
Well, the indications of the SGX Nifty isn't very encouraging, Alex. But, well, we've had a good year so far, and there's no doubt about that. Are we expecting to end with some losses? Well, even if that is the case, we have seen a very, very good year come through. But for now, the SGX Nifty is indicating a little bit of a decline. And this is largely on account of weakness, I reckon, to a certain extent in terms of its peers. But it was another, relatively good day for the broader markets, not so much for the benchmark indices, which did advance at the end of the day. And, you did have some gains in your banking indices too. Actually, losses in the banking indices too. And, the PSU banking index down around 1.2%. ADRs right now are mixed, but Tata Motors is doing well along with Vedanta. And let's see how these stocks pan out and trade. Of course, we'll get a little more in terms of the auto sales coming through eventually on the first and the second. But for now, very little participation from from FIs or DIs for that matter. And contributors wise, we are looking at HDFC Bank, Tata Motors, ITC, providing a little bit of a gain against ICICI Bank, TCS, and Infosys, cancelling that out. But what about futures and options? How are things panning out here in the new series? We are there already. Very little traction. Less than 0.5% decline for the Nifty futures, and the banking Nifty futures is looking at a decline of 9%. So, positions taken earlier are unwinding for now. And what about the open interest distribution? Again, we are keeping an eye on the 500-point range between 12,000 and 12,500. based on max OI inputs and calls. And in terms of options, again, changes in options, we saw a lot more writing around the 12,300, 12,400 calls. Watch out for these levels. These may very well define some amount of resistance on the higher end. We did see the VIX move back up around 4.5%, back above the mark of 11. The Nifty put call ratio as well, did move to around 1.4 against 1.45. And in terms of stocks, what we are keeping an eye on is something like Cummins India, Bata, PVR. All of them are looking at good traction with respect to accumulation and open interest. Early days for the new series, so we won't have too much in terms of those stocks which are seeing unwinding in open interest. But we do have Voltas, Balkrishna Industries and NBCC, which do stand out. But Alex, again, given it is the 31st, there will be a lack of participation because the holiday season is not over. I reckon trade may very well pick up the 2nd onwards.
Thanks so much for that, Agam. All right. Also, watch out for the benchmark government bond. It's been in focus these past few days, of course, with the RBI's Operation Twist trying to push yields down on the higher end of the spectrum, that is on the longer term bonds. For now, let's turn, of course. So there you have it on your screen. The 10-year yield as of yesterday was trading at 6.548%. All right, but now let's turn to Somit Sarkar, who's joining me now to tell you all about the stocks in news. Somit, good morning. What are the stocks on your list today?
Good morning, Alex. I'll firstly start off with Jet Airways on the Bloomberg report, which says that the Hinduja Group is preparing a bid to buy the company. According to people familiar with the matter, now, the group is planning to submit an expression of interest by January 15, which is the deadline. Secondly, RBL Bank, because they've approved the allotment of nearly 2 crore shares worth 676 crore rupees at 340.7 rupees per share. Now, the funds that have been allotted these shares include Isbridge Capital, FEG Mauritius, Ishana Capital Master Fund and WF Asian Fund. Chalet Hotels, because they have entered into 5 new agreements with Marriott International to open hotels which will have 1,500 plus keys in luxury and upper cycle hotel tiers. Now, the company would build hotels and extend the contracts across brands such as W, Westin and Marriott exclusive apartments in Hyderabad and Mumbai. PTC India Financial Services, because they have received fresh sanction of fresh long-term loans worth nearly 500 crore from Bank of India for a period of 10 years for lending to infra projects and other operational requirements. Syntex Industries, because they have defaulted in payment of NCD's interest worth nearly 3.5 crore which were due on December 30th. And couple of stocks. Firstly, Dish TV on a bull deal where promoter Direct Media Distribution Ventures sold nearly 2.5 crore shares. JSS Infra Developers was the buyer, and HEG, where LIC has reduced its stake in the company from 8.9% earlier to 6.9% currently.
All right, thanks, Somit, for that. We've also got the Telecom data, the subscriber data out, and Reliance Jio, it so happens, added nearly 1.5 crore subscribers in October this year. Mukesh Ambani's so-called startup did lose out to Airtel on one front, though. Somit Sarkar is here to tell you all about that. Somit, this comes at a time when Jio has started charging for voice services, so that increase in subscribers is quite something.
Exactly, Alex. Despite introducing the ISO tariffs in the month of October, Jio still managed to add most number of active users on its network. It added nearly 1.44 crore active users in the month of October 2019, which is the highest in the last 3 years since it began operation. As you can see here, nearly 143.5 lakh active users only in the month of October, and this is the highest in the last 3 years, that is since Jio started operation. Now, Bharti Airtel on the other hand added nearly 68.2 lakh users, which is the highest in the last 12 months, and this is the first time that Bharti Airtel has been able to add active subscribers on its network in the last 12 months. As you can see here, the green line, the company has been continuously losing active subscribers in the last 12 months. Now, Vodafone Idea on the other hand lost only 7.4 lakh active users, which is the lowest in the last 11 months. Now, for Vodafone Idea, if you see continuously for the last 18 months, the company has been losing active subscribers, and in the last 18 months, it has lost nearly 12 crore active users. However, in the month of October 2019, the loss of active subscribers was lowest in the last 11 months for Vodafone Idea. Now, moving on to higher revenue generating customers. Now, Airtel continued to add more broadband users on its network, which are the high ARPU generating customers. In the month of October, it added nearly 50.3 lakh broadband users, which is the highest in the last 9 months for Bharti Airtel. As you can see, in the month of Jan 2019, it added nearly 1 crore active broadband users, and in the month of October, it has managed to add nearly 50 lakh. On the other hand, Vodafone Idea also reported strong broadband user addition. It added nearly 36 lakh broadband users, which is the highest in the last 11 months. However, because of the active subscriber loss for Vodafone Idea that we have been continuously seeing in the last 18 months, there has been a major shift in the market share. Reliance Jio, only in 3 years, has now managed to become the second largest operator in India on the basis of active user base. Its market share is currently at close to 31%, while that of Vodafone Idea has slipped down to 30.8%. Bharti Airtel has again managed to become the #1 operator in India with a market share, with an active user market share of 31.5% as of October 2019.
All right, thanks so much for that, Somit. Very interesting picture there in the telecom space. Now, it was an action-packed 2019, not only for India but also across the globe. BloombergQuint has put together a list of events that highlighted the year gone by. Take a look.
प्रधानमंत्री जी भाजपा के मुख्यालय में आ चुके हैं।
that brings us to the here and now. There's several stories that you can find on the website BloombergQuint.com. Of course, it goes without saying you'll find all the live market action right here on BloombergQuint, but take a look at the website. In the aftermath of the PMC bank crisis, the RBI proposed to lower the lending limit of urban cooperative banks, and urban cooperative banks' exposure limits will now be revised to 10% of Tier 1 capital for a single borrower or party and 25% for a group of connected borrowers. That compares with the existing limits of up to 15% and 40% respectively. And Tata Sons chairman Natarajan Chandrasekaran has said that uncertainties will persist in the new year, but exuded confidence that the Tata Group is better placed to take on challenges. In a year-end letter to employees, he said the group is stronger, more resilient and future-ready now, and is moving decisively on financial fitness and operational efficiencies. That brings us to the end of this program, and indeed the last one for this decade, but you'll find a lot more over the course of the day, and you'll find all of it on Bloomberg Quint. Thanks so much for watching.